Hey everyone, it's Raghu and I'm back with Mindrolling and I'm with Vincent Thibault and we are compatriots. We found out Vincent we're both from Quebec, the province that is one of the provinces in Canada. And in fact, Vincent is right now in Quebec City. Welcome.
Hi there. Thank you so much.
And I lived in Montreal, formative years of my life. So, Vincent, I have the most embarrassing thing to say, actually, which is, so everybody, from Montreal to Quebec City, what, couple hours, car ride, something?
2.5?
Yeah. I've never been to Quebec City.
Oh,
in my
dear.
entire life. By the way, everybody, it's a fantastic place, and it has so much history. And that's where you grew up, right?
Yes, indeed. Yeah. It's a beautiful town. You should come by one day.
Now I'm thinking I have you as a potential somebody I know in Quebec City.
There you go.
Yeah, you never know. I might do that, Vincent, and give you a ring. So let's start with, you grew up it's interesting because of my relationship with Quebec in particular, and you grew up right in the center of it. Talk about that period in your life and how the heck you find something around, gee, I am not my thoughts, I am not my story, and there's a whole universe that can open up, which is what I ask everybody when I first meet them. What's your story?
Well, that's a great question. I grew up in a quiet neighborhood. I was, fortunate to have caring parents, but they were not particularly religious or anything of the sort. My father was an atheist, not of the aggressive type, if you catch my drift. He was fairly open-minded, but he was mostly into philosophy and literature and so on and so forth. But I did grow up surrounded by books, and that, I think, makes a difference. In one's life, learning to enjoy reading, that has been a huge deal for me. And then, as a teenager, I got into martial arts and, kung fu and all those things. And it opened my mind to, shall we say, the East, and philosophies from different parts of the world. And one thing led to another. And long story short, I really connected with Buddhism, and especially the Tibetan tradition, but all schools of Tibetan of Buddhism. I do have huge respect for each and every school. Yeah.
Which Vincent wrote a wonderful book called Overflow, which everybody can relate to, especially A Buddhist Guide to Navigating the Chaos of the Digital World. And a lot of good advice in here, certainly. But what prompted you to go in this direction? With about our overflow.
This is something that I personally experienced, and I still do to some extent. Definitely, most of us do feel overwhelmed, submerged, if you will. There's so much going on, right? We go through life as if it was an endless to-do list. And we've never had access to so much material, and yet we're never fully content, right? And just paying attention to the world around me and, speaking with friends and, people from different backgrounds, so many different types of people, and yet something always comes up. It's too much or too many, having too much to do, too many things to do, too many different options, too many different types of tasks. that you're supposed to be doing on any given day, too many options, too many conflicting opinions, source of informations, and so on. So we have this content overload, right? And this seems to be omnipresent in our life. And it's a subject that I think really matters, actually.
Yeah. Well, living here in the United States, it's even gotten more complex by virtue of what's going on in so many aspects of our lives. And I think this has added to the noise in a way that is so difficult. Because if navigating to the, shall we say, more quiet, still part of ourselves, as the Quakers would speak to it, through that noise is just very difficult right now. And that adds to the to-do list. This is beyond the to-do list because it's kind of like a background hum that gets seemingly louder and very difficult to cut through.
I agree. And it leads to all sorts of problems. I mean, you use the word noise, and of course there's literal noise, but it's also a figure of speech, right? I mean, there's so much going on all the time. Like that. What's the title of that movie? Everything, Everywhere, All at Once.
That's kind of it. Yeah.
So much going on, and that, of course, leads to brain fog, fatigue, the inability to make informed decision, but also to a lack of confidence and a lack of spiritual clarity. And there's also, I think, a decline in empathy. It's a loaded word nowadays, but I think it's an important issue to tackle. Empathy and compassion and all these words are very loaded, but I think our experience of it, our capacity to feel compassionate or kind-hearted in a very simple manner is actually affected to a large degree by all that noise, because we have so much to do, then, we kind of build up some kind of, how would you say, armor, if you will, or some kind of defense mechanisms. And we kind of become indifferent to the suffering that we see when we see so much. But there are different ways to live, I think, and that means a lot to me. It's an important subject.
And it's not necessarily spending most of your time on Netflix, which is another way to, For me, it's basketball. I love basketball, so that's my out. So there's one thing here that I read. You should maybe be interesting. It's in French, this particular phrase, art du déplacement, that you picked up in when you were doing your movement training. Tell me about art du déplacement.
That's such a fun question. I'm kind of surprised you're bringing this up, but art du déplacement is, as you said, that's a French term. It's connected to something that is known as Parkour. That's quite often the term we use in the English-speaking communities. Parkour. It's a physical and artistic discipline, much like martial arts, if you will. So it's a complete training that involves evolving or going about one's natural or urban environment and using whatever street furniture, for example, or whatever piece of landscape you have as an obstacle and as a means to train oneself. So some people say you go from point A to point B, but it's a little more complex and rich than that,
Kind of reminds me about how Ram Dass in particular used to speak to suffering, not as something to run away from, which all of the great teachers speak to, but when we were with our guru, Neem Karoli Baba, in India, I followed Ram Dass back from Montreal to India way back when. And Ram Dass came out of this in terms of how Neem Karoli Baba didn't teach, so there's no, all there is basically whatever anybody wrote down that he might have said to them, you know. But in relation to suffering, Ram Dass used to say, suffering brings me closer to God, which in some way Neem Karoli Baba paraphrased that in a different way. And so this is something that is very difficult for us in the West, anybody, anywhere, but particularly in the West, where we, you know, move away as fast as possible from any contrary thing, you know, from a thought to a physical reality or so on. So this kind of speaks to that, does it not, in a certain way, that these very, from all the way from very traumatic to very minor things that happen to people in life that are difficult to embrace is an opportunity to transform, no?
I think so. I'm not, to be honest, I'm not exactly familiar with the teachers you mentioned, so I don't know how similar these approaches are. But there's definitely something there in changing your mental posture, if you will, or changing your perception of obstacles or so-called adversity or difficulties in life. And if you find a way, be it in your own subjective experience, everything's subjective in a way, but in your own, even be it just on the cushion, you know, for a few minutes a day, be it just that. If you find a way to make that switch and see difficulties as opportunities, then you can slowly learn to turn everything onto the path of enlightenment. If there's such a path for you, and if enlightenment is not a myth for you, then you can find a way to turn all situations into fertile ground or manure, if you will.
Yeah. What's enlightenment, by the way?
I think the question mark is quite important.
Very. I mean, you know, there's so many people, especially when they just find a path, a spiritual path, and that becomes a goal, which in the West we're very familiar with. This is the way that we live. You got to have a goal. And in this case, you know what I found in my life through many decades and through being with a being that, so you've not heard, we haven't talked, everybody, obviously, Vincent and I think I mentioned Neem Karoli Baba, right? And that's where you said, I'm not sure I know who that is. And so this was the being that a bunch of Westerners met in India, you know, in the early 70s. He was, he left in 73, he passed in 73. And that bunch of Westerners have gone on to be teachers and have done, you know, really, some of them exceptional things in this world. And this being, I mean, we all, when we're asked, okay, what's the common thing that you experience? And certainly it was no object, no subject. It reminds me when you said, you know, we're all just subjectively looking at everything, which is absolutely true. So to meet somebody who had gone beyond that, which many of the books that you've read in the Tibetan Buddhist tradition are very much, they speak to that. And one in particular that I met, at darshan of it's called in India, it was the 16th Karmapa. When I actually met him, and he, put the silk scarf on and blessed and so on. It was in a black hat ceremony. I knew instantly that whatever I had experienced with Neem Karoli Baba was the same thing here, and there was no difference, even though the supposedly completely different traditions.
Yeah.
That there was no difference, and the idea that these are completely two different traditions, actually, my experience is it's false. There's only, and this is of course what Neem Karoli Baba, when we first sat down, there's only one. In Hindi, he said sab ek, all one. There's no difference. There's, Christ, Buddha, Mohammed, Krishna, Hanuman, all one. So we actually moved through our experience with him, many of us, into Buddhist teachings, because he wasn't teaching meditation or anything like that. And we gravitated towards Vipassana in particular, and the Tibetan masters, which, wow, amazing. There's so many incredible Tibetan teachers and so on. Anyhow, that we're talking about enlightenment, right? And the idea that, for me in particular, I experience the reality of someone not being in duality in front of me. But do you know what the greatest thing of all was? Caring, kindness, compassion, love, taking care of people, getting outside of yourself. That's enlightenment to me, And to aspire for a state that would, make you happy or be a sublimely blissful or whatever it may be. It's like people with psychedelics. Not these days, but all days, my own experience back in the day to now, where people are like, well, every second weekend we have a wonderful ayahuasca gathering going on, and it's so revealing to me, and I'm sure it is for people. But again, this harks back to one of the things I wanted to talk about was attachment. And that is something you talked about in the book. Why don't we talk about what that phrase, what that word rather, really means through the Buddhist lens? And it's one of the main things that we got to deal with.
Well, definitely, it is in everyone's life, in so many different areas. We all experience it in one way or another. But the term can be confusing somehow.
That's what I'm wondering, yeah. Tell me about that.
For example, sometimes we'll say, I'm very attached to my family, and we'll mean it in a positive sense, right? Especially in French, we do have this way of expressing one's belonging, using the word attachement, right? One can be attached to one's country, to one's sense of duty or whatever, and it can connote something extremely positive in some sense. That's not. Nobody is saying. Well, at least I don't remember seeing anything in the Buddhist teachings that say that it's actually a bad thing to care for the people who happen to be around you. I mean, for some karmic reasons or whatever the causes and conditions. Some people are closer to you, and it's just normal that you happen to be thinking of them more often than people you never met, right? So. And there are even some teachings where actually says that it's good to care for your parents and for your community and so on and so forth. So when we say that there's an issue with attachment, people often get confused because some people may think, well, what's wrong with that? So we're not saying that the problem is with caring. We're saying that the problem is with attachment in the sense of being bound as something that limits your freedom, and that especially binds the mind. So you can be attached to any kind of object, an object in the sense of subject-object duality, right? So it could be a physical object, it could be a thought, a belief system, an idea, your idea of yourself, or what you think you are, or what you think you're supposed to be. It doesn't have to be only somebody, right?
You just, you touched upon something. And you talk about it, and it's around trust. And why don't you talk about that a little bit? This is for me, and again, going back to interpreting what enlightenment is or is not, little markers on the way that really help one open up to the reality that you are not necessarily having to live in the story that you create for yourself, just that simplicity. And so the first thing in my experience that helped me leverage it out of that story was trust. And trust in a teacher, trust in an experience that gets, that brings in non-duality to you. What is non-duality? I mean, I just explained what my experience was with Neem Karoli Baba, but just in each one of us has had an experience where we have gone out of self, the identity. And when we've left that identity, it's opened up a space that is a huge breath of fresh air, right? So trust is a really big thing. No, you talk about it. Talk about it from what you were pointing to in the book.
It is important. It is a huge deal. In fact, the question is, what do we rely on? We trust and distrust, and every day we go through the day and judging. Oh, this is nice. This isn't. This isn't nice. That's reliable. Oh, that's BS, and so on and so forth. But I think there's a level of trust that we should examine, especially if we consider ourselves a spiritual practitioner, regardless of the tradition. Is there any way that we can learn to be at ease with our own mind? That's a very different kind of trust, because we can rely on all sorts of phenomena, all sorts of belief systems, for example, all sorts of practices, and they can be very helpful for a time. But everything that is conditioned or compounded, and by that I mean made of parts and depending on causes and conditions, which are themselves temporary. Okay, so anything that is made of parts or anything that depends on causes and conditions is ultimately impermanent, to use a Buddhist lingo, right? And we're not saying that it's all negative, but we're saying that it's not ultimately a reliable refuge system. So you can rely on some things temporarily, but at some point, these things are going to decompose. They're going to fall away. They're not going to work out anymore for some reason. Circumstances, inner or outer circumstances, are going to change. And then what, right? you have to learn to be at ease with your own mind, and that makes a huge difference. And I think that's where a sort of I'm being wary. I don't want to use the term ultimate, but a different kind of trust starts to get involved if one is able to be at ease with one's own mind.
No, let's go. How about personal experience? So, I mean, my personal experience is there are people, particularly this one person, is Ram Dass, right? That I had trust in. And going back further than that, I had trust in Bob Dylan, right? There was somebody speaking to my angst when I was a teenager. And that was important. And then I tell this story a lot. John Coltrane, who's a great jazz musician, who I saw in Montreal in a club downtown.
Wow.
Yeah, when I shouldn't have been able to be in that club, And I had an out-of-body experience. And so there was trust. Oh, wow, this is real. No drugs, nothing, And, there must be people, real humans, that you encountered that engendered trust. They engendered the trust that you were just speaking to, trust of your own pure mind.
Absolutely. And that applies at so many different levels. I mean, if I have a medical question, for example, that's just an easy example, right? I mean, I know that I can trust some people who have proper training that I don't have, right? I have to rely on some people, and we all have to rely on so many people for anything we do. In fact, if you're going to the supermarket and buy some food, you have to have some level of trust that the food that you're buying is not going to poison you, or not completely poison you, at least.
Yeah, right.
You know what I mean? Like, you always have to have some kind of trust. But of course, what you're referring to specifically here is about a spiritual training, right? And there has to be some kind of, if you want to make progress and go beyond reading a book, as helpful as books can be. I mean, I'm a huge, I'm a book nerd, right?
I see that right behind you. Yeah,
it's just part of it. And I write books, I edit books, I read all the time. I mean, of course, but if you ever want to go beyond just the experience of being alone, reading a book in your living room or whatever, it's good to have somebody who's been there, so to speak.
Yeah.
And by being there, I mean somebody who's had some experience of human suffering, who's learned to see through that with more clarity, who's learned to see through their own blind spots. And we all have blind spots, by the way, and it's good to have somebody who can point them out to us, who's kind enough to point those blind spots, So of course you can find somebody to rely on, maybe all the way to enlightenment, then I suppose it's a bit different. I'm not there yet, so I have to rely on great teachers, and I've been fortunate enough to meet several teachers. You cannot just say, "Oh, I'm going to develop trust in my own mind and just hope that it's all going to turn out fine." You can turn into some kind of a egomaniac if you start to think that way, right?
Mm-hmm. What are you tell me about what teachers have you encountered? Always interested to know about more of their stories.
Some people have just one teacher, and it's totally fine. Some people have many teachers. I happen to be in the second category for some reason. Not saying that one is better than the other. And typically, if you have one good, genuine, authentic teacher was the real deal, then you don't need anything more. But I just happened to have met several teachers. And my first teachers were of the Gelugpa tradition of Tibetan Buddhism. They were monks. But I'm very much a Nyingma guy. For those who don't know, Nyingma is an ancient tradition of Tibetan Buddhism. It's considered to be the first phase of development of Buddhism in Tibet and the Himalayan region. It's very much present in Bhutan and Sikkim and other parts of the whole area. And so I've met several teachers. My most influential, if you will, is named Tulku Tundup Rinpoche, who lived in Cambridge, Massachusetts for much of his life. He's written many wonderful books. I'm also connected to some teachers at the Vajrayana Foundation in California. And, I've received quite a bit from Shechen Rabjam Rinpoche and many others. But yeah, very much connected to the Nyingma tradition.
Wasn't that, was Dilgo Khyentse in that tradition? Nyingma? I mean,
yes.
To me, he is beyond any of that. But
well, exactly. I mean, he was particularly renowned for many things. It was like a spiritual giant. It's an absolutely extraordinary being whom I've never met. By the way, I've met some of his students, some of the lineage holders, and of course met him in the way through his writings. But Kyabje Dilgo Khyentse Rinpoche was what we call a rime master. Rime is a Tibetan term which means non-sectarian, basically.
Yeah.
And so he was holding so many lineages.
Yeah.
And it's extraordinary the work that he's done. He realized that some lineages were about to disappear from the world forever. And he found ways to receive these teachings so that he could hold them and then pass them on. Termas is a little bit a different thing, but yeah, he was also very much...
he did that for sure, yeah.
Yeah.
I love Dilgo Khyentse Rinpoche. I did not meet him. I could have met him because, as I said, I met some great lamas, Kalu Rinpoche and 16th Karmapa and so on. So, yeah, he's a giant, everybody. We'll put in the show notes a couple of his books. Everybody should get exposed to him. And he took no prisoners, Dilgo Khyentse. He was the most loving, beautiful soul. He might say yeah to that. And at the same time, completely uncompromising. Oh my God! Yeah, everybody's worth checking out. I mean, we've talked about him on Mindrolling on this podcast many times before. Yeah, he's a favorite. So, okay, wait, I'm going back to trust. Okay, and the chapter that caught my eye, or the part of a chapter, whatever. Devotion and trust. And I have to say that, again, I had this trust through a teacher, Ram Dass in this case, and other teachers. To me, by the way, you can have a zillion teachers, but there's only one guru. The Tibetans are a little bit more liberal. I have Tibetan friends who have several of these, Neem Karoli Baba being one of them, and Khyentse Dilgo being another, and Karmapa, this one. I don't know if you know Lama Surya Das. He's an American. He lives, yeah. This guy met a gazillion of these incredible beings in his life. Anyhow, back to it. Devotion and trust. Now, the tradition that I come from is, everybody would assume right away that's what it is, Bhakti Yoga, right? The yoga of devotion. And it gets dismissed by many, many other traditions as, as we met Trungpa Rinpoche, we spent time with him. And he used to joke and call us the light and lovers. That was his term for us. He knew where we had been, though, and he knew who this being was, so he was quite respectful, especially with Ram Dass in particular. But there is some way that there's a confluence that starts, in my mind, with trust to allow one to understand, even for a moment, what devotion really is. This is not a good word in the West. This is a word that implies somebody taking you over. You give everything, material up to whoever this might be that you're devoting yourself to. There's so much blowback. Talk a little about, what you've garnered from Tibetan Buddhism around this particular subject.
That's a huge issue. Very much connected, by the way, to the faith issue. Also known as the F word, I suppose. No, but I mean, it's a loaded word. And devotion brings up all these concepts and neurotic habits. People hear that, and then, like you said, what's the deal with trust? Is that trusting blindly some guy who's supposed to do what exactly? Bring me to some kind of spiritual level and whatnot, and asking me money, while he's doing it, or there are deceivers out there. Definitely, that's extremely important to be aware of that, and to learn to recognize the BS. And sometimes it's not that easy. But there are also some great beings, people who are not in it for the money, who are not trying to abuse you in any way, and who are only there to facilitate or foster your journey, if you will, and accompany you in the most wholesome sense. See, the thing is, what we usually translate as devotion in Tibetan is mugu, and that could be translated more literally. It's a bit of a broken English, but more literally, it means something like interested humility. And that's, I think, more telling, interested humility. Well, the humility part, quite often we lack. Let's face it. We think we can learn everything by ourselves, that we don't need somebody to give us any form of spiritual advice. Of course, if we need to learn piano lessons, we go to a piano teacher, or we need to learn anything, we'll have no issue going to a teacher, right, to learn how to dance and how to cook and how to do this and that. But spiritual matters, well, I should be able to understand things by myself. I don't need some guy to tell me, or some girl to tell me what to do. So the humility part, it's important. It's very much part of the deal in what we translate as devotion. And then the interested part, to have some kind of spark, some kind of curiosity, some kind of motivation, inspiration. So you're not totally surrendering your free will or anything of the sort. You're still honing your analytical skills and so on and so forth. But at some point, there has to be some kind of meeting of the minds or meeting of the hearts. And for that to happen, you have to let go a little bit.
A little bit, yeah.
Or completely. But I think that it's not necessarily something that happens overnight. And there are different kinds of teachers, and it's really important to mention that there are some, let's say, level or some kinds of teacher that are just some person who has more experience than you, and you can learn a little bit from them or a huge deal from them. It doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to become your guru, right? It's just somebody that you learn from for a while, and they have more experience than you do, more understanding. Their heart is in the right place. They're not necessarily enlightened, those to say, right? But
say the
you know what I
least.
mean. And you learn from them, it's fine.
Yeah.
And then, sometimes the relationship can evolve, or you can have a different type of relationship with a different type of teacher who starts to mess with your life a little bit. And then, there are different kinds of relationships and different kinds of teacher-student relationships, right? But it's important to be aware that the whole notion of being completely devoted to one teacher, as powerful as that can be, it's not for everybody. And it's not for every spiritual approaches either. And it's not, often enough, it's not the first thing you do, right? You can learn step by step, and that makes more sense for most people. Yeah.
Yeah. Again, I go back to the difference between teacher. A teacher points the way. You are not, in terms of the heart-to-heart meeting, that can only occur with somebody who no longer has attachment. It's no longer in that zone whatsoever. Then there can be a start. This is all my experience to a devotional relationship, and ultimately, where that gets one is discovering that same place inside yourself that you're devoting yourself to. No difference. Funny, I tell this is. I'm sorry, everybody, boring you again with this story, but I can't help it because it really speaks to what we're talking about. I was in southern India, and I went to see this guru, and everybody went touching the feet. This is the normal thing that people do, pay obeisance to the guru in India. But when I saw that, and by the way, I'm like 24 years old, so I was like, what is this? Ugh. I happened to, next day, Ram Dass wasn't there, but he came the next day, and I said, what's this all about? He said, it is the spirit inside of you that is completely one-pointed on the divine. He might not have said exactly those words, but this is, what I remember. That is what is being exchanged with, in this case, this particular guru. If you have a problem with that, perfect. Good work. Work on it. Just get aware of what is going on inside of you to be able to transform, because it's just, attachment. Anyhow, so next day I went back, and it was kind of the same thing, and I really wasn't able to let go into that conceptually. But maybe 3 days later, I ended up with Neem Karoli Baba. Ram Dass would give me a letter to find him and all that. And I'm just waiting outside for him to come out. There's a few Westerners around. Well, Vincent, he came out. There, no thoughts. I had no thoughts. I mean, I remember the shock. Oh shit, I know you forever. I know you. There's a knowing and a home thing. And I just hit the floor, because it was so staggering to have what I look back on now, a representative of the universal consciousness, basically. That's what he is. And Dilgo Khyentse to me, and 16th Karmapa, rare beings, but that's what it was. So it went beyond my own duality mentality in that moment. There was not even a choice. I mean, and I don't know anybody who was around me in that moment who felt any different. Now, that's, shall we say, extremely good karma for me to have, been exposed like this to a being like that. And at the same time, it really began a lifetime of work to understand devotion and trust.
Thanks for sharing. It's a great story. But I think uh, you know, you said a lifetime of work, and that's not to be. We should not forget that bit.
Yeah. No, there's a commitment there and a courage to apply oneself, which you do talk about as well. I want to, you quote this. It's, I don't know that I know it. Trela Kyabjan.
Yes,
Gee, I don't know who that Lama. But I
look him
love,
up.
yeah, eh? Is he
Oh
still
yeah.
with us?
No, he
Yeah.
passed several years ago, but
Oh,
wonderful, wonderful teacher. And I have to
yeah.
say that some of his students, including his wife, are teaching also,
Hmm.
and he was really instrumental in the dissemination or spreading of Buddha Dharma in the West, but especially in Australia.
Oh.
He founded centers there,
Hmm.
but he wrote so many books, and they're very profound. And he had such a deep understanding of the Western psyche.
Oh, yeah.
It's really,
Like
yeah,
Trumpa. Trumpa was
yeah, very
incredible
much.
that way. Yeah.
They actually were very much connected. Yeah,
Oh, yeah. Oh, wow.
yeah.
So, producer of this podcast, let us get a link going for Traleg Kyabgun. I think it's soft G, right? Kyabgun?
Yeah.
Yeah. Kyabgon. And this is the quote that Vincent put in the book that I absolutely adore. If we wish to make any real progress on the spiritual path, we must become worthy vessels for the precious nectar of the Dharma, a practice that is sustained by interested humility, which you spoke to a little bit ago, will have more depth, breadth, and longevity than one punctuated by sporadic and undisciplined bursts of enthusiasm. Without curiosity and humility, nothing can be retained or absorbed because our minds are already too full of judgments and prejudices. This neat little paragraph said so much to me in terms of sharing that. I mean, it's just absolutely just wonderful. I mean, my little story there of going and not being able to touch I mean, I did, but it was not really, it was like, that is exactly, I mean, point to, interested humility. I had absolutely zero in that moment. Of course, I got straightened out, fortunately, because, meeting Neem Karoli Baba. But yeah, love that quote, man. That's really quite something. The big book, Vincent, we'd have to have about 5 podcasts to go through some of the concepts, which I enjoyed. One of the things that's one of the most difficult things for people on the path, for all of us, especially because of the associations we have with the word karma.
Mm-hmm.
Why don't you talk about that, especially the false conceptions of it? I mean, the one I love the most is you're walking across the street and somebody has a bag of groceries and they trip and everything falls out and you turn back and go, karma, and walk on. Okay. That's probably the most egregious version of how many people can consider karma. But go ahead, fill us in from your side.
Just for fun, you mentioned Tralik Kyabgong Rinpoche, an author whom you just quote. He also wrote a book called Karma, and I think the full title, is something like Karma, What It Is, What It Isn't, Why It Matters.
Oh, really? Okay, we got to get that up there.
Yeah, it gets quite sophisticated at some point, but I mean, it's great. It's a great book. But just for a little bit of context, okay, the whole book, Overflow, loosely follows a three-step framework, if you will. First, we learn to relax and tame the monkey mind. And then we train to open the heart. In that section, we talk about compassion and all those issues that relate to compassion and all the concepts that we have that relate to compassion. And we talk about courage and strength of character and the sense of duty. So we have the first part, relax and tame the monkey mind. The second part on training the heart. And the third part on what we could call wisdom, which is also a loaded word, which could mean anything. But it's about learning to relate to all phenomena, both outer and inner. That's a different thing. But the reason I'm mentioning this framework is that in the middle, at some point in the middle of the book, we have this huge section which discusses what we could call worldly wisdom, in a sense. Worldly wisdom. It's a section on a whole segment of the book, a big chapter on so many different types of tools that we can use on a day-to-day basis to simplify our lives, and it examines all these different ideas that we can come across, to be more efficient at work and gain more clarity in a professional context and so on and so forth. And in that chapter, I tackle the notion of karma. But I try to do it in a way that is relatable, but it is extremely important to understand, at the very least, that the notion of karma is not exactly to be equated with destiny or faith. Of course, everybody may have their own definition of these words, right? But the whole idea is not that, everything has already been written somewhere, and it is screwed, fatalistic. Yeah. it is not fatalism, right? When we say that the present has been determined by the past, that's one thing that I think most people will agree on from a logical standpoint, right? We're also saying that the future depends on the present, but it also depends on the past. So there are some things you can do, and there are some things you cannot change, right? You can learn to distinguish and discern and be a little more refine your view through some proper training. And that may involve honing your skills when it comes to what type of behavior I should adopt and what type of behavior I should reject or let go of. All the effects that my neurotic patterns can have on my own well-being and the happiness of the people around me, and so on and so forth. It's a very, very rich theme, but I think it's worthwhile to at least explore this a little bit.
Yeah, and take it out of the rational mind. There, like this idiocy of you see somebody having a problem, shitty karma. I mean, this has nothing to do with it. It's just, that's our Western materialistic view. And you have stuff in here about clear seeing, right? And clear view, and all, which are very important, especially in addressing something like this, And I mean, I just used it myself. Good karma. I had good karma. I met Neem Karoli Baba. in itself, in and of itself, that's a fairly true statement. But to get at the radical complexity of all of that is way beyond our pay grade, shall we say? Right?
Also, it is connected to what we in Tibetan Buddhism often call merit, and that is also that confuses a lot of people, and it's also kind of loaded because sometimes people get the idea that we're asked to be good Boy Scouts. Like be a good boy, be a good girl, do a good action, and it's good for you.
Yeah, yeah.
It's not like some people, it's not like merit is somewhere in a bank account, or if there's somebody judging you with a spreadsheet, like, oh, okay, he's been doing these nice things today, so I'm going to reward him with this and that. That's not exactly how it works.
It doesn't when you go to heaven and somebody's ticking off. No. Oh.
Well, yeah,
Yeah,
that's
right.
not my view.
Yeah.
Let's put it that way.
Yeah.
But causes have an effect,
Yeah.
and vice versa. I mean, an effect has causes. There are also conditions and circumstances. There are many things to consider, but it would be nihilistic to think that we can do anything and it doesn't have any effect whatsoever.
Yeah.
Things
Exactly.
have consequences, right? And they can be positive or not, right? So we have to find a balance between being too cerebral, thinking about it like in a mechanistic manner.
Yeah.
But we also have to be careful not to fall into the extreme of being too nihilistic about it,
Yeah. 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 It's quite something to investigate. We have done a bunch of it in the work that we've done over the years as well, working with different people with different points of view around this subject of karma. And one of the big things, and we won't get into this right now, Vincent, but that we have talked about and delved into is karma and grace. That Ram Dass actually said to Neem Karoli Baba, are they the same? And he said, oh, well, I can't talk about this in public. That's what he said. Later in the day, one of the devotees came along and said, Ram Dass, Neem Karoli Baba wants you to know we are on the same page. He didn't say it like that. We are. So over the years of deepening, in his case, his practice and so on, and in my case, I actually had the opportunity to spend a lot of time with a woman saint who basically took over took care of his temples after he left. And the answer that I got was, no, of course, they are the same. There's no division in the universe here. But as humans, we need to operate like they are not, and we need to take action in our lives, but have that caveat of understanding where they come together. So, yeah, big subject, no?
Indeed. Nowadays there are so many teachings available out there, and sometimes very stuff that used to be secret for so many, centuries. And you can go to the bookstore, and buy some really holy and sacred teachings and very profound stuff that you can definitely misread and get confused about. And the reason I'm mentioning that is that nowadays a lot of people talk about non-conceptual and non-duality and non-this and non-that and effortless, non-meditation and so on and so forth. And basically, maybe you have nothing to do in the end. And
All of that, yeah.
Everything has its own context. And if you using these beautiful ideas to disregard the effect of your actions, on a daily basis, then this is very that's not a
Yeah.
path that I would recommend to anyone.
Yeah, it's the famous spiritual bypass is what that is.
Yeah, definitely. That's a good term. And we're surrounded by this kind of spiritual market.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Hey, great to have you here. We're at the end of the podcast. I do want to end it with something, and this from the Buddhist canon, which is really a meditation, loving kindness. May all beings enjoy happiness and the causes of happiness. May they be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. May they never be separated from the supreme happiness that is free from suffering. May they remain in the mind of boundless equanimity, free from both attachment to kin and hatred of foes.
May it be so.
May it be so. Yeah. Hey, everybody. So, here's the book right here, Overflow, Vincent Thibault. And we'll have a link to that in the show notes when you go to BeHereNowNetwork.com/mindrolling. And you'll see, we're going to, everything that we mentioned, and we're going to have links so that you're easily able to engage. And thanks again.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Everybody, we'll see you next time.